I'm starting this master copy of Monet Water Lilies. He painted a lot of water lilies. This is one of his smaller ones. I'm using a pretty cheap white. This is a titanium white. This is a pretty big painting, so I'm setting out a lot of it. I would rather have too much paint on my palette than too little. I've got a cool red. This is an alizarin red or an alizarin crimson. Different brands use different terms. I've got a very warm red. This is Vermilion. You can also use a cadmium red light if you're looking for a very warm red like this. I've got a cadmium yellow medium for my yellow. This is a warm yellow. Putting out a lot of that because you tend to run out of yellow first. I've got a Viridian green. I'll also be mixing some greens with my blues and yellow. I'm gonna have two blues. I'm gonna have a cobalt blue and I'm gonna have an ultramarine blue. This is a pretty decent approximation of Monet's palette at the time that he was doing these paintings. Monet used flat brushes, especially by this time in his career. He was using very large brushes, but I'm not going to use brushes as large as the ones that he used because I'm working on a scaled down canvas. This canvas is 18 by 18. He was working on these canvases that might be 6 feet square, so he was using very large brushes. I'm going to use this size brush right now. This is a number 10. It's a flat brush. So now what I've got is a canvas with a warm gray tint. I'm not going to cover this whole canvas with this green. I'm looking very closely at the image of his painting, and even underneath the areas where you're gonna have those brilliantly colored flowers and lily pads, he's got that dark green. So I'm gonna get dark green underneath where those lily pads are gonna be, and then on a lot of area of the water, but not all of the area of the water. Okay, so I'm gonna pick up some of that on my brush, I'm gonna pick up some of that, and I'm gonna pick up some of this. So I've got a variety of colors on my brush right now, and I've got a lot of paint on my brush. So here we go. I'm looking at the directions of his strokes too, because that's very, very important when you are copying an Impressionist, especially a Monet. You'll see those brush strokes, and so you gotta think about how he moved his arm to create those brush strokes. Something you'll see in a Monet is a lot of thick and thin. He's gonna have some areas where the paint is gonna be going on very opaque, very thick. It's gonna even have visible texture standing up off the canvas. He's gonna have areas where the paint's very thin, where it's even maybe letting the tint on the canvas show through. So you wanna keep that in mind when you're copying an Impressionist. So you're seeing a couple of things here. You are seeing a lot of canvas texture showing at the edges of my brush strokes here. My brush strokes are being broken up by the canvas texture. That's fine for right now. There are going to be some painters where you'll continue to see that all the way through to the very end of the painting. There will be some painters where you will never see brush strokes that are broken up like that. Monet is kind of in the middle. When you wipe the paint off your brush, you can actually use it to remove wet paint. So that's what I did right there and right there. Something that Monet was very, very skilled at was using the character of his brush strokes and the way that he moved the brush to express the character of what he was looking at. So this painting, he's got a lot of these long vertical strokes, and those imitate the quality of the reflections that he was seeing in the water. He does a lot of things with just the movement of his brush. That's something that he was really great at. So now I've got kind of an all-over layer of this green, but I need to tweak it a little bit in some areas, because in some areas it's a little more bluish. When I look at my image of this painting, some areas it's a little more yellowish or a little more brownish, a little more dull. So I'm just gonna work on that a little bit before I move on. Okay, now I'm gonna tweak these greens a little bit. So now what I've got is a canvas almost covered with green, but it's covered with a lot of different greens. If you look at probably any stroke that you see on this canvas, it's probably gonna be a slightly different green than any other stroke. And you gotta be able to do that if you're gonna do a quality impressionist style painting. So I'm satisfied with the greens right now. I'm gonna move on to the blues. And that is the last thing I'm gonna do today. I'm gonna do the lilies themselves in another session, once the other stuff is dry. So my blues here are a combination of ultramarine, cobalt, and white. That's what I'm seeing there. With the green that's on my canvas right now, the green is wet. It's much wetter than that warm gray layer. So it's gonna mix with the blue and it's gonna affect it a little bit. Gonna start with the dark, more ultramarine blues that are up in the corner. And you can already see that the blues are mixing substantially with the greens. So what I may even do is add some blues today and then do another layer when this layer is dry, get those blues more vivid. So we have that. Those dark blues following the bottom of this group of lilies here. Right now, I'm also using my brush to sketch in the large shapes of those lily pads. As you can see, I'm picking up a lot of that green that's wet on the canvas when I apply the blue. So I'm not going to try to make the blue perfectly match what I see on the image of Monet's painting today, because it's going to be way too difficult with the way it's mixing on the canvas. I'm going to add blue, and then I'm going to come back on another day and go over it again, get a stronger blue. A side note about these colors. The brilliant colors of the Impressionists were possible because of the second industrial revolution, the chemical revolution. It was now much easier to get these bright colors. Suddenly cadmium colors were available. Synthetic ultramarine was available, which made it much, much cheaper than traditional ultramarine. Prior to this, bright colors had to be made using crushed semi-precious stones. So obviously those colors were very, very expensive, but now these colors were cheap. You could use a lot of them. A lot of painters had access to them. You didn't have to have a huge commission to be able to use bright colors. Okay, standing back, taking a good look from a distance at what I've got. The more you stand back, the better. I'm gonna get a little bit more blue in there, and then I'm gonna call it a day for today. Okay, I'm gonna call it a day. Doesn't look like much yet, but if you look at an unfinished Monet, it doesn't look like much either. All right. Day 2 of this Monet copy. So last time I put in the greens and the blues, the reflections in the water. Today I'm going to start addressing the lily pads, and then I might get to the flowers today, or I might need to leave that for a third session. We'll see. This canvas took probably about 5 days to dry. I used a lot of cobalt blue, and cobalt blue is a very slow drying paint. Ultramarine dries very quickly, but cobalt and alizarin crimson and cadmium yellow to a certain extent tend to dry very slowly. So this took a few days. It's completely dry. It's completely dry to the touch right now. I can scratch it, there's no paint coming off at all. And I have not gone over this canvas with any kind of oil or medium or anything at all. I'm just gonna be applying paint on top of dry paint, because when I took a close look at the Monet painting that I'm copying, that's what he did. I see a lot of brush strokes that indicate that he was placing paint on top of dry paint. Now, I don't have a visible drawing anymore, so the first thing I'm gonna do is take some slightly thinned out paint, and I'm just gonna sketch back in where these lily pads are gonna go for myself. So you can see there, because I used that ultramarine blue, those couple of areas where I needed to adjust the sketch that I did, I could just wipe, and the blue pretty much disappeared into my green and blue background that I'd already painted. So you're really not gonna see that at all once I'm done with this painting. So now I have to decide which color I'm gonna attack, and normally we'd go from larger to smaller areas of color, just for convenience. This is a little challenging because there isn't exactly one color that's dominating these water lilies. If I had to choose one, I'd probably choose kind of the light, sort of teal, turquoise green that you're gonna see especially in this area. But, you know, we've got yellows down here, we've got a lot of pinks and purples over here, we've got a whole rainbow of colors in this area, a whole rainbow of colors in these areas. So I just kind of have to pick something. So I'm gonna go ahead and go with that light greenish teal color. So let's go into this. So something you can see right now is we've got a bunch of different colors here. We've got a light green, we've got some light blues and pinks, we've got almost a peach color here. I did not have to go back to my palette in between strokes to get those different colors. I had them all on my brush in the first place. I'm thinking about where else I can use the colors that I've already mixed before I make any changes to what I've done. So because I'm applying my paint today on top of paint that's fully dry from last session, the paint that's fully dry has a little bit of a texture, and so when you look at my brush strokes, they have this broken up character, which is caused by the paint going on top of this textured dry paint from last session. And for Monet, this is what I want, because I've looked closely at his strokes for this painting, and I see that character in his marks. Monet will give you a lot of flexibility with your colors because you don't have to have a smooth surface. With some other painters, if you make a color mistake and you cover it up, it will affect the surface that you have. You might be able to see that little mistake. It might distract from the smoothness of what you're trying to get, but Monet has a very textured surface. You can really see the work that went into the painting. You can look at the strokes and you can see almost in your mind the actions of him painting over and over, day after day. So that gives you the flexibility to go over a color if it's not quite right and not worry about whether there's going to be a texture or whether there's going to be a little sign of a mistake left behind. I added this cobalt purple to my palette because a purple as vibrant and chromatic, as intense as this, would be impossible to mix from the primary colors. Even though red and blue technically do mix to make a purple, they would not mix a purple that I could use and get the same effects that Monet did of color. So now I'm looking at this painting and I'm thinking about what I've already done and what my color strategy should be. I said I was going to start by working on the greens, but I kind of shifted towards working on the pinks and purples. So I think now I'm going to work on the yellows and greens. So you don't want to have just one green in your painting, just one purple, just one orange, especially not for Impressionism. I have two reds here, I have two blues here, a mixed purple and a mixed green. I only have one yellow out. That's because I took a very close look at Monet's painting and I determined that I could get all of his yellows using cadmium yellow. That's the range that I saw his yellows in. I didn't see any yellows that I thought needed to be more of a yellow ochre or more of a lemon yellow. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna come back to the blues in the water. I had to pause on that at the end of day one because I needed to be able to put colors over with a dryer brush and my colors were mixing with the very wet paint that I had on my canvas. But now I can come back into that. I'm looking always at the direction of the brush strokes because the brush strokes are so visible in a Monet. Their direction is very important for creating form. And one thing I notice is that in the upper left and lower left corners, the strokes are a little more diagonal, and I think it's probably just because Monet was reaching a little farther into those corners of the painting. I'm not sure he was trying to indicate any kind of form with that change in direction. I think it might have just been an accident. Now I'm gonna go into the greens in the water. I established greens in my first session, but I'm gonna go in today and create a little bit more variation and have some more vibrant greens also, because last time my greens were a little bit dulled because they were mixing into that overall warm gray tint that I started with. Okay, so I'm gonna leave the blues and greens of the water for now, and I'm gonna go back into the rainbow of those lily pads. You might notice that I did not completely cover up the greens and the blues that I applied on my first day because I want to be able to see the layers. It gives us a sense of the depth and the partial transparency of the water. So I'm not trying to cover everything that I did. The shapes of the lily pads, particularly in here and up here, are quite undefined. What I mostly have are these horizontal marks rather than kind of round shapes like the lily pads will actually be in the end. And what I'm gonna do towards the end of the painting, what Monet did from what I can tell from his brushstrokes, is he laid down these colors and then he went in with dark blues and defined the shapes of the lily pads. So I'm gonna do that later. Now there are areas of this painting where the warm gray tint that I did at the very beginning still shows through. Down here, over here, some other kind of scattered places. And I did that because I looked closely at Monet's original painting, and he let those areas of the canvas show through. And what you get when you let areas of the canvas show through, you get an effect of lightness. If you start with a light tint on your canvas, or if you start with a white canvas even, like Van Gogh often did, you get a lightness, you get kind of a luminosity shining through your canvas by not covering up all of that with darker color. So that's what Monet was getting from his canvas. It also gives a little bit more of that transparency that I was talking about earlier with the water. You have brush strokes that are thicker, more opaque. You have paint that went on earlier that's thinner. And then you have these areas where there's very little paint at all, letting the tint show through. So that works for you also. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you enjoy our channel, please like and subscribe. We'll be posting new videos regularly. For more information and more videos, visit our Patreon. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. You may have noticed that some of my paint tubes are pretty old and pretty messy. This could be 20 years old, this tube. I'm not even sure, but it's still fine.
That was completely out of focus.
Oh, should I do it again?
No.
Okay.